Hello, everyone. Today's guest is Larry Mager from Mngt-Ctrl, a company focused on helping medical device and healthcare organizations improve quality systems, operational performance, and regulatory compliance. As we see that in a highly regulated industries, especially like MedTech, success is not only about innovation, it's also about building compliant, scalable, and efficient systems that consistently deliver quality outcomes. We'll know more on this from Larry. Larry, welcome to the Posca podcast and really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Larry, before we deep dive a little bit on your background, your career journey, and what led you to the medical device and quality system space.
I actually had worked after becoming an engineer for a company that was very good at training young engineers in manufacturing engineering, quality engineering. I wasn't so much involved with product development in that company, but I learned the basics of Lean and Six Sigma. And as I evolved in that business, in that company, I migrated more into problem solving and quality management.
And what is it that attracted you to the operational excellence and compliance, that specific phase? Is there any specific incident or anything that made you feel that, okay, that's something that needs to be addressed?
I would say that started to become formed when I left that company, which was a Fortune 500 company, and I went to Silicon Valley. And one of my roles in a company, and my first far ranging was when I was the fourth person into a business. I was handed a prototype product. And I was the head of operations, and they said, make this. We had no manufacturing. We had nothing. My first office was a closet, believe it or not, but I spent no time there. And I had no boundaries. And so luckily I had that good foundation. And I had made probably about 140, or not probably, nearly 140 changes in design for manufacturability. We had to touch design space. I had to create a balloon that nobody said could be created. I had to touch manufacturing. And I had to do all that through contract manufacturing. I had to build an operational or quality system, and it passed FDA rigor, and the product was launched in the market and remains in the market today. And that was probably not where my thoughts of management control emerged. It was the next role where I was pulled back into the Midwest into another Fortune 500 company from somebody that was in that first company. And he was the general manager of a manufacturing plant, and I became the head of quality over about 130 people with 9 managers. And the concepts of management control started to really become real. I was no longer working on a project, I was running an organization. And that's where the FDA also entered the picture. It was a medical device manufacturer. We got what was called a corporate warning letter across all locations for that business, and myself and 23 others, so there were 24 locations, had to go to the local headquarters or the headquarters for the business, and we had to create a single quality management system that was compliant for removal of an FDA corporate warning letter. And it was during that period of time where I recognized a couple of things: that compliance doesn't equal quality. You can have a compliant procedure, but it didn't always manifest itself into a procedure that delivered the right results. And I just thought we left some of the quality elements off of the table. But nonetheless, there was the soft side of it, of turning an organization around and communication to the organization. That was where I first realized I don't want to sit and run a system. I wanted to help businesses improve their systems. And so my journey from that point forward has been what I call in pursuit of management control.
Yeah. I mean, that leads me to uh, larger question that's on the hidden complexities of medical device operations, because most people think about healthcare innovation from the perspective of breakthrough technologies or products, but behind every successful device company, there's an enormous operational and compliance infra. So, what do you think? Like, why are quality systems so critical in device manufacturing? And what does operational excellence actually mean in this, at least in the current regulatory environment of healthcare?
That is a big, broad question. I'm going to try to answer it
Yeah,
in terms of that concept of management control. And when you say quality system, there's a big change going on as well.
yeah,
I think what we thought a quality system was in MedTech has been revised, and that came with the quality system regulation being revised and transformed into quality management system regulation. And just a note, the regulation is not in itself a management system. So, with that said, I think that the operational infrastructure is also inadequate because there's one more element, and that element that is rapidly forcing businesses to do transformation activity is what is called Industry 4.0. And that came about after the age of the internet. And we couldn't stop the internet anymore than we can stop Industry 4.0. That's tied to AI enabled technology. So it's the digital age of technology. That started in around the 2010s. And it was really about all the smart equipment. And that was implemented very well in the manufacturing operations space, but it didn't translate into the rest of the business. And I'll touch on that in just a second. But what was a companion to Industry 4.0 was this concept of management control using, it's called Quality 4.0, but it's all about using data to provide a higher level of management control. And everybody knows what this is. It's really not mysterious if you understand smart home technology, where you have a Ring doorbell and your oven and your washer and dryer and your furnace talking to you on your phone to give you data. That's the concept of the appliances would be Industry 4.0, and the management control on your phone would be the Quality 4.0 in a smart home. So if you transfer that, and as I said, the manufacturing ops, they did that well. Companies like Siemens and others have just knocked the ball out of the park.
yeah,
And ERP systems, which are extremely, I don't want to say complicated, but that's the word jumping in. There's a lot of activity that goes on in a manufacturing operational environment that's very different than what I call the biz ops environment, business operations. And my management control solution that I've been working on does is it focuses on that biz ops environment.
yeah. I read somewhere like on quantum quality. Is quality management and quantum the same, or they're used interchangeably? So maybe if you can clear some of my doubts in that.
Yeah, quantum, it's used in a lot of ways, but in physics, a quantum is the least amount of any amount of entity to get the reaction between the two entities. So the reason I used it is because I also have built into the solution this concept of theory of constraint, which is the opposite of bringing a lean army or a Six Sigma army and trying to fix everything. I had a chief financial officer once pound his fist on the table to the executive team and say, none of this is falling to the bottom line, guys. And the realization was anything you fix in your organization that doesn't contribute to opening up systemic operational constraint is a waste. You don't make yourself, you don't give yourself greater capability, greater capacity, or less cost if you're throwing a lot of money at a bunch of things that are not what's holding you back. So that was very important. So to me, quantum goes hand in hand with doing the right thing at the right time, but it's also tied to this concept of an efficiently effective business. You have to understand if you look at a business, and I've already spoken of manufacturing ops and biz ops, but revenue operations, which is marketing, sales, and customer success, they generate the demand in the market and they send that demand signal into the business. And knowing that some businesses don't even have manufacturing operations, the business operations sends the signal into manufacturing ops, whether it's yours or whether it's contract manufacturing. So where is I spoke earlier that a lot of great work was done in manufacturing ops, it really wasn't done in biz ops because there was not were not ERP systems or something similar to the ERP systems created for the biz ops environment. And it's not as complex as the ERP systems, but it's made now based upon this digital age of technology and AI enabled technology, which is what that is. It is now available to us, but it also has to be implemented smartly. You just can't take a bunch of AI and dump it into the system and do it at a low
Right.
cost and have it work. There's a lot of people that that have tried that and their programs are failing because what has to come first is to work on the infrastructure, and that's that biz ops infrastructure that's inadequate. One
Yeah.
last comment. I made the comment about there wasn't a system or a solution like an ERP system, but every medtech company, typically every medtech company has what's called an EQMS system. And as I said earlier, and it's based upon a handful of processes that are pre-programmed to be compliant with
Right.
regulation. So where regulation doesn't touch every other process of your business, those EQMS solutions don't address that. And like I said, they're pre-programmed. So you're stuck with old technology. And that's one of the challenges we have is to get leadership to say, we're going in a new direction. We're going to make our business effectively efficient or efficiently effective. I get that backwards. And I guess it could go either way, but efficiently effective is really the way to think about it. And it's really time to embrace this digital age of technology and embrace a new pathway forward. But it does not begin with the AI-enabled technology. It begins with looking at the work your business does and the people who do the business. So all work is process. It's the work plus the people. And without the people doing the work, it doesn't get done.
Larry, do you think startups, like new companies who are coming up in this, do they underestimate these complexities? And just your opinion, do you think they underestimate, and why do you think they do?
Actually, I don't think the new startups do. Having been in a startup myself, I was wide open to every possibility. And I had to get that product in the market. The one thing that I couldn't do was leave the balloon manufacturing to somebody else because we had design work, we had manufacturing capability work, we had a lot to figure out. So we took that in and embraced it. And everything else I was open
Yeah.
to outsourcing. So I think from that perspective, new companies that are growing fast, they're open to solutions. Now,
Uh,
every company, if let's say they come out successfully and they become profitable, so they're viable at this point, what happens is, and it just happens naturally, as companies grow and scale, whatever their infrastructure was, it now needs to be consistently renewed and updated. And what happens is it's the older companies that have a lot of money, a lot of people, and they throw these big programs together. And they're the ones that are least open to the big companies, least open to listening to new ideas.
Less flexible.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what do you think are the biggest pain points that companies face whenever there's a FDA inspection audit?
I think what they do is they go after a compliance solution. I know the QSMR was just recently revised to QMSR, but compliance doesn't win the day anymore. If you actually look at it, the agency never chartered companies to be compliant to any regulation around a quality management system. they created that regulation and they believed that regulation would help companies better create quality management systems. But for some reason, the quality group has become more isolated inside of a business. I was the leader of quality in multiple organizations, and I can't tell you how many times I was either directly or indirectly told, you stick to making sure the FDA stays off our back and make sure we're compliant, and we'll do the rest. Well, it doesn't work that way. The
Yeah,
business is one entity. And when others are running operations and they keep quality away from the little quality big Q, away from the little q of quality of operations, that's when the trouble occurs. So I think the problem is businesses are siloed. When things go south and the FDA comes in and issues OAI 43 or warning letters, I'll tell you, it turns into, well, you shouldn't have let this happen. And quality is then out on an island. And it just, we have to break silos in businesses and we have to start treating a business as one homogeneous
yeah,
entity where everybody is on the same page.
absolutely. So, Larry, that leads me to the next segment, a little bit more about management control and how you are addressing these pain points and what has been the outcome so far, or something on those lines.
Yeah. What I have to say, I want to address the second part of that, the outcome. I was working for a pharmaceutical company and I was doing the work that I learned to do my whole career, which was take process, make it good to get the outcome that you need. And without getting into the story of the business, their manufacturing, which was contracted, didn't have the capability, was never validated. And I warned of that. It was still a, I'll just say this, the FDA granted approval because it was a late stage cancer solution with radioactive product that would be delivered near the lesion. And so the FDA basically said, we're going to allow you to move forward. And the contract manufacturing was with an entity where they knew the quality of that manufacturer because there was COVID vaccines being produced there. What they didn't know was that the product that was used and the instructions and the equipment and everything wasn't on the nice, shiny manufacturing floor. It was in a dark corner of the warehouse, and a lot of work had to be done to develop that process. So I was in a position where I was trying to communicate this to the executive team, and the response I got back was that they were given the green light. The president hired about 40 sales reps. They went out and sold, and alas, we had yield issues, and they nearly lost the market because going back to that rev ops, you can sell all day long, but you have to understand when that demand signal is sent into the business, can the business deliver? And so business operations in that business was also immature, just like the manufacturing. And they're still around today. They're not the leaders in the market, but they learned a hard lesson and they move forward. So I think that's the bigger picture is that. So I saw that and I literally took a step back and I said to myself, it's not good. This is in my head and in my computer, and I wanted to get it out. So I've been working on that for, I think, 2.5 years of developing it so that it can be deliverable. And I'm nearly complete with that work. So I'm pretty excited about that. But I've already started communicating that because I just believe people have to hear this is available now, and soon it'll be available in a wider, more readily accessible format.
Awesome, awesome. Larry, and I would also like to touch upon your entrepreneurial journey. Management Control is doing an awesome job. Okay, you had an idea, you got it implemented and everything. But that's the story that we want to know. Having a business plan is one thing, but getting it materialized is another thing. How did you what was your journey when you had that idea and till today? How did you accomplish it?
I would say that my own personal journey, and I actually refer to that as in pursuit of management control, but it evolved. I had to evolve. At first, I was more of the traditional command and control. I thought I had all the answers. But there's also something that occurs as we mature. And I came to realize, and I stated it a little earlier, but people are the most important part of everything. You look at RevOps, you can sell product. You can send the signal in, and if the business operations has developed and documented and created a great dossier of business process or an ecosystem of business process workflows, remember all work is process, that's fine too, but that's static. And that's what a QMS would be. The FDA, I think it was a mistake in terms of how it's considered that it's a full quality management system, but the FDA would say that no, then they would say that's just, and they might still say that's just your procedures. And it's not truly a quality system until you add people. And that's really important because it doesn't do anything. So you have to be able to manage process and people. So part of the evolution was to figure that out and setting the people are important side. And I'll come back to that. So I started really focusing on business process management paradigm and the concept of capturing, converting a procedure, because that's what a lot of, that's another MedTech gap. They have procedures, and the procedures, oftentimes, for the reasons I cited earlier, are check the box activities. They're not well written. Matter of fact, these EQMS solutions, some of them that are touted as the biggest and the best, have read and understand training. Nobody reads and they click the box. They figure I'll come back later and read it, but they do their training record because they know that's how deep the FDA is going to go. Yep, this person's trained, but are they competent? And that's been a big gap in business. I started to recognize that the QMS or EQMS solutions are limited in what they offer. They're pre-programmed technology, and they don't describe or define the work as a process workflow. And so part of that evolution was then, and as I said, I started seeing the digital AI enabled capabilities and that concept of quality 4.0 and management control, and they merged. That's how they merged together. And I recognize that if you're looking at an ecosystem of data from X number of process workflows, and you're looking at it's a combination of the process and the people. So we don't need to measure those separately. If we go to improve something, we can peel it apart and understand it. But the smart thing to do as an engineer, which I was trained as, right,
Yeah.
was to take 1 degree of freedom away. And so that way I stepped back and said, we have to define process and we have to understand process is about capability, capacity, and cost. Remember that demand signal is going to come in as volume. So there's your capacity, but people bring the capability and they bring their capacity when they bring that capability, and there's a cost. So if I can take every single process and digitize it, every process workflow and digitize it, I can then extract the data that gives me, and I can do curation and analytics to give me the capability and capacity and cost of a process workflow. And if I measure every process in that way, I can aggregate that. And now I have the capability, capacity, and cost of my business operations, just like I might have in my manufacturing operations, right? And so it's really important to understand that defining that work so
Yeah.
that it leaves nothing to the imagination. And a procedure is only a fraction of what we're trying to get. And procedures are not built well. So what I did was I created it's a version of RACI. There's 100 versions of how to do RACI, but I added a lot in there and I extract everything and I, in essence, create not only a process workflow, but I create a dossier of training and risk management and everything that goes with it. And
Yeah.
most importantly, when we have a process workflow, we define the role of each step. And when I work with the teams that do the work, I say, I'm not talking about your job description. I'm talking about the role you play in this process when you do this work. And we define that because when we go to people, which I'm shifting to now, the work is secured. We expect that they execute that with compliance built in to regulation, that they execute that in a compliant manner, which is an entirely different thing than just having compliant procedures. So with that expectation, we can now turn to another huge issue because I talked about one of the issues being the MedTech BizOps infrastructure. The other issue is the disengagement of the modern era workforce. I think there's a Gardner report out there, and it's been a long running report year over year for at least half a dozen years that says industry currently has about a 20% rate of engagement, which is horrible because the most expensive, so people are always looking for how do they take cost out of the business, and then you see these reductions in force. The most expensive is there's a lot of hidden talent, wasted energy, because you have hire people for against a job description. They report into the business in a traditional hierarchical structure, and then some group leader has them working on whatever processes they supposedly own. And again, many of those are not documented unless they're tied to regulation. And so what happens is you have people working like crazy maybe in one group and sitting more idly in other group, and it ebbs and flows, but that's not how work needs to be done if we want to unlock, and this is when I say efficiently and effective. If you want to unlock efficiency, you do so by using fractional time of people and then being able to fit their skill set and upskill them and develop them for any role that they're qualified for, not just within a siloed department. And that's really important. And the other important part is why I emphasize the efficiency, because people say, why does a quality guy talk about money and cost? You can you can go look up Malcolm Baldrige award winners that went bankrupt because they became perfect. And it goes back to the theory of constraint. It's not about being perfect. It's about satisfying market demand. If you can satisfy market demand, doesn't matter if you're compliant. And so what happens is your efficiency, when you're inefficient, you're eating up your net profit. So you have to really screw down the work, lock it down, and then give and manage the variation in people, because that's where the real variation lies.
Yeah,
You do work at a different rate than I do. And every day we might do it at a different level because we're human beings and we're different on every day. So there's a lot that we can do just by taking the pressure off of people and recognizing that people work in a process. So we make good process, or I'll say as is process. I don't want to make it perfect yet. And then the point is when we go to do the analytics, and this is where the digitization comes in, you just take that process workflow and you digitize it. So you're not going out, there's 31 flavors of AI. So people shouldn't be afraid of this, shouldn't be scared to do this. It's just taking a digital technology and digitizing a process. And then that will yield the information that identifies systemic operational constraint. And this is really important. When you go through the modernization of the work and then the energizing of the workforce against that work, and then you digitize, you do the digitization, that's all transformational. That was new. But then from there, everything you touch, when you're trying to improve systemic operational constraint, you have to be able to optimize whatever you're touching and only what you need to based upon that systemic operational constraint.
correct, correct. Larry, thank you. And just before we close out, I just want you to probably give some guidance to fellow entrepreneurs who are planning to get into a consulting, not necessarily into what exactly you are doing, but in the broader medical tech space. What guidance do you give them?
It depends on the stage of your career. So I'll start with at a younger stage, you have to be aware that there is a bigger picture. But everybody is the same way. When you're learning, you have to stay focused in whatever area you gravitate toward. And so, yes, you have to become a subject matter expert in certain ways that fit into some sort of bigger schema. But then be aware that in order to grow into larger roles, you become less of a specialist, less of a subject matter expert, more of a generalist, more understanding of what makes a business successful. And you just have to be open to change. And that's one of the issues. People right now are looking for what's next. There's a lot of confusion. And I think it goes back to one of your earlier questions. How do you get companies to listen? It's tough. And I think a lot of times they don't until they're in trouble. And then they want to go into this, let's fix ourselves quickly. And especially when it's the FDA. But with using that as an example, what I would have done before, which was what everybody pretty much does now, is I would have focused on compliance and then looked at my system and tried to do a better job of incorporating other things once we're building compliance into it. What I would do now is I would approach it, and the agency reflects this in their new QMSR, and the EU MDR has it as well. You want to look at risk. The agency chartered the FDA to protect public safety. And public safety for medical devices is patient safety. And understanding that every single device causes harm, even Q-tips, you cannot have a competitive product that causes more harm. So what I would do today, and this is that idea of constantly evolving, and what I have a solution for businesses who are interested, is to use a tool that the agency developed, and I think it came from other places as well, which is a safety assurance case. Take your inventory of products, show that they meet per ISO 14971 2019, the state-of-the-art benefit of patient safety. And where it doesn't, you open a project to identify what is the failure mode, how do I put critical to quality controls, and to bring it in alignment. Not make it perfect, bring it in alignment with the state-of-the-art benefit of patient safety, or called SOTA. Once I do that, the agency, and there's case law, Utah Medical versus the FDA, that settled this, the agency will let you continue forward. And now instead of working on, as the big companies will do in a remediation, making you compliant, I want to work on making you efficiently effective. I want to work on your ability to profitably satisfy market demand with compliance built in. And so that's the difference. It's a more holistic solution. And my advice to people would be always focus on what it is you're focusing on with the mindset of what's the bigger picture and where do you go to next, because you do evolve. You can't be doing the same thing you did when you were a young engineer that you're doing as an older executive.
Thank you, Larry. This was a fantastic conversation. And what stood out was, as we always, we know this, but hearing these things more from an expert like you, that behind every successful healthcare innovation is the foundation of a very strong operational systems, quality processes, and disciplined execution, I could say. And companies like yours are playing a great role in that. And thank you once again for joining us and sharing your insights, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank